Hello everybody, Pinstripe here, and welcome back to the Hogs of War Miniatures game guide over here on Tabletop Simulator. Today it's the day to get your goggles on and say chocks away as we take to the skies and look at the aerial action phase of gameplay and exactly how it works. I remember the first time I played this game, it was pretty confusing to get used to all the key parts of this phase and what exactly everything means in conjunction with what is happening on the board. However, as the name implies, the aerial action phase will involve two primary air vehicles of the biplane and the airship. Now, what's most apparent about this phase of play is the fact that in the early stages of the game, this phase will be skipped, as neither player will possess the buildings or material in order to produce and deploy air vehicles. As mentioned in the previous guide regarding the base building phase, the player must buy the airfield to start producing planes, or the airship construction building to be able to produce airships. For airships specifically, this means that all airship modification cards will become available for purchasing. Once again though, the buildings and the actual vehicles themselves have to be bought separately, as it is the purchasing of the buildings that allows for the construction of the air vehicles. The airfield, as we know, costs just 1 swill, and the airship construction building costs 2. However, things will get a lot more expensive once you start actually producing aircraft, with a single biplane costing 8 swill, and depending on the size of the airship that you end up building, you could be looking at a minimum cost of 9 swill for an airship. Now, airships are assembled by purchasing at least 3 parts: the tail, the middle section that can consist of either a cannon or bomb bay, and a nose that also has a machine gun. The tail, bomb bay, and nose will all cost 3 swill each, however the cannon bay does cost 5 swill. These parts can be bought and assembled in the recruitment phase. However, as mentioned previously, the player cannot launch the airship until they have all 3 parts. The airship can be as long as the player wants it to be, so long as they have enough swill to consistently purchase additional cannon and bomb bays. Planes and airship parts are a one-time purchase, meaning that unlike buildings, you don't have to maintain and upkeep in payments in order to keep your air vehicles. It's also worth noting that the starting unit cap for the biplane is 2, however the airship cap is not listed, but I imagine it starts as just 1. Now, the sausage symbol on each unit represents the action points that unit holds. An action point is essentially the amount of stuff a unit can do in one turn. So for example, the tank has 3 action points, as the player can use 1 action point to turn or move, and another action point to fire their weapon. As for air vehicles, the biplane has 1 action point and the airship has 2. The biplane only has 1 action point because the aerial phase for planes occurs at the same time. So when the aerial phase begins, both players would move, turn, and shoot or drop bombs with their plane at the same time. Now, the demo version of the miniatures game on TTS is actually missing the large shields that would hide the player's plane console. When both players have chosen their direction, speed, and turn values, they must place a marker on their console to indicate their choices. Once those choices are made, both players remove their shields to show their movement, and then that would occur on the board. Now, looking at the console, we have several numbers here that we need to understand first in order to actually maneuver and use our planes. So here we have the plane console, and as you can see, there are a bunch of numbers on here that we need to understand before we can actually do something with our biplane. We have some pretty self-explanatory details at the bottom, whereby you can determine which direction you want to turn or move. So you can turn left, you can turn right, or you can move straight forward. Then we have these top numbers here, which have the blue stopwatch symbol behind them, and we have some red numbers at the bottom. The top blue numbers are the initiative values for movement, and the bottom numbers, the red ones, are the initiative values for shooting. When I say initiative, that basically determines who goes first in either one of those areas. So for instance, if I have a lower initiative value for movement, then I will be moving first, and if I have a lower shooting initiative value, then I will be shooting first. And basically this allows for a little bit more detail when it comes to aerial combat, because with every single turn and every single choice that you make on this console, you won't always be picking the same values as your opponent. So you could be shooting first, or you could be moving before them, and that basically just makes the aerial combat a little bit more interesting. So to give you an example, we have our biplane here, and like I said, normally there would be a shield blocking my console from my opponent and being able to see his, because obviously I can also see his console over here. But yeah, if we break down the console even further and sort of give a demonstration of how this would look, if I chose an initiative of 5, so that gives me a speed of 2, turn of 3, and a shooting initiative of 2, that would mean that I can move 2 hexes forward, I can turn 3 times, and depending on what his initiatives are for shooting and the movement, I would probably be shooting first because my initiative is 2, and yeah, it is a little bit complicated because there are so many values to keep note of, but like I said, speed is the amount of hexes that you can move, and turning is pretty self-explanatory because it works in the same way that tanks do. So like I said, I have a movement initiative of 5, a shooting initiative of 2, and my speed is 2 and turn is 3. So pretty simple. If I'm going to choose to move straight forward, as you can see here, you place your counters on where you want to move, and then you place another counter on the initiative. Then that means I can move forward 1. I can turn if I wish, and then I can move forward. And the other thing to note as well about the aerial combat phase is that you don't have to use all of your turns. And what I mean by that is, as you can see here, I had turn of 3, so I can turn 3 times, but if you don't want to use all of those, you don't have to. But again, just to give you an example of all of these here, we've already done speed of 2, turn of 3, so if we say turn to the right, and do initiative of 4, so our speed will be 2 and turn will be, our speed will be 3 and turn will be 2, then we will of course turn to the right as much as we can go, I suppose. Then we'll move forward 1. How many turns do we have? We have 2 turns, so I can turn again. I can go over here, and I still have another one, so I'll turn this way and then I'll turn back that way. Again, I don't have to use all my turns, but that is that one. Again, if we move on to the next one, let's go forward this time and go initiative 3. So my speed is 4, my turn is 1, so let's turn this way, and then we'll just move 4 hexes that way, and I'll hit my own base. And finally, if we do initiative 2 and turn left, we have a speed of 5 with no turns, so I can only go to about here because, oh, and my plane's dead. There are rules in the rulebook which tell you about leaving the battlefield, so if you want to brush up some notes on that, you can check that out if you go ahead and jump into TTS. The final 2 that I want to talk about are initiative of 1 for movement and initiative of 6 for movement as well. And these are where things can get a little bit tricky because you are running the risk of stalling. Now you'll see on initiative 6 and initiative 1, on 6 the speed is 0 but you can turn 3 times, and on initiative 1 the speed is 6 but you can't turn at all. So you risk the process of stalling your biplane if you decide to choose either of those, and when you do that you have to roll 1 green dice against yourself. So you take an explosive dice, so let's say I'm going straight forward, doesn't really matter, and I'm going to go for initiative of 6. I then have to roll 1 green dice against myself, and if I get a critical, then my plane crashes and I am out of here. So yeah, if a crit is rolled on those 2, then your plane stalls and crashes and burns and is out of the game entirely. But you may be thinking, well, why would I bother using initiative of 6 or 1 if I'm just going to run the risk of stalling? And it all depends on what's going on the battlefield. For instance, if I've managed to move my biplane onto the same hex as the enemy base, and if I actually have bombs loaded as well, so as you can see I have a bomb token ready to go, so I'm ready to bomb the enemy base, and I have initiative 6 on here. I'm obviously not going to move because my speed is 0. I can turn 3 times, so I can just turn, basically. And then my bombing run is basically determined by rolling the green dice. So if I don't get a critical rolled against me, let's see. Yep, so no crit is rolled against me, which means that I can then commence my bombing run and have fun trying to target any of the enemy buildings in the enemy base. So yeah, movement and initiative of 6 or 1 is going to be very specific depending on what is happening on the board and in the game, both in terms of the objectives that you're going for. If you're bombing a certain building or deployable or base, it's very circumstantial. So just to reiterate, remember again, speed is the amount of times you can move from one hex to another. Turn is pretty obvious in how many times you can turn your biplane, and then the speed and shooting initiative indicates which player will move first and which player will shoot first. You can see it is exactly the same, except it doesn't have as many options. There are no crazy initiatives here whereby you aren't able to be penalized by going at a slower or faster speed. There is no stalling with the airship. Once again, you can turn left or right, you can move forward, you can have a max movement initiative of 6 and minimum of 3, and then we have shooting initiative of 1, 1 or 2, which is maybe a little bit more, it's not complicated, it's just a bit more slow compared to the biplane. So as you can see on the console, both planes and airships are able to drop bombs on ground units and buildings. Bombs cost 1 swill each and are represented by these bomb tokens, with planes only being able to drop 1 bomb and airships initially being able to drop 2, however that can be increased if the player decides to purchase more bomb bays. The bomb bay must be loaded on the console after the purchase in order to then drop these explosives. The dropping of bombs is carried out after all initiative-based movement and attacks have been completed. Bombs can be used to attack targets that occupy the same hex as the aerial vehicle at the end of its turn. Any units, deployables and bases that are hit by a hog bomb are rolled against immediately using the attack dice. Bomb damage is determined by rolling 1 explosive dice, so the green one, and the amount of dice increases with each bomb that is dropped. So if I'm dropping 2 bombs, then I'll roll 2 green explosive dice, which in turn increases my chances of destroying my target. In terms of weaponry, planes have a max shooting range of 5 with their machine guns, which will incorporate rolling the red and blue dice depending on the range chosen by the player. Meanwhile, the airship's front guns have a max range of 3, again using the red and blue dice to determine damage. If the player purchases the cannon bay, their range will be increased to a maximum of 5 and will instead use the green and red dice when rolling for damage. So how exactly is damage dealt to air vehicles? So as I mentioned earlier, in relation to the stalling detail on the console, biplanes can only be damaged by critical hits from explosive or gun dice. They are invulnerable to melee attacks from melee dice. So let's give an example of how damage would work in relation to trying to damage a biplane. So we have here an enemy grunt who is using an AA gun trying to target my biplane. And as you can see, he is 4 hexes away, like straight away. You can see here on the deployable reference that the AA gun can roll 1 green explosive dice to try and target me. So if he manages to roll a critical hit, which he does because the explosive dice has more crits available, it's more likely to roll a critical hit, then the opponent, so Mr. Grunt over here, can then go ahead and roll a VDD dice. Now that is a vehicle damage dice, if I remember where I put them. So you take 1 VDD dice, which is this grey one here, and you have 3 different symbols on it. So you have a burn token, you have a critical, and you have, if it ever shows it to me, and you have a standard hit as well. So Mr. Grunt has rolled a critical on the explosive damage dice. He then gets a VDD dice to roll. If he rolls a burn token, then if he rolls a burn damage basically, then a burn token is taken from this pile and it is placed onto my console. And basically what that means is that the next time my biplane receives a critical hit, then Mr. Grunt over here will be able to roll another VDD dice. So he'll be able to roll 2 at the same time, which obviously increases the chances of rolling for critical damage. Instead this time he's got another burn and a hit this time, so another burn token is applied to my console, and basically burn tokens don't remove anything on your console. They basically just set your plane on fire and make it more likely that you will receive a critical hit from the player rolling a VDD dice each time they end up managing to hit a critical on your biplane. So yeah, burn tokens increase the likelihood of a critical hit being rolled by the VDD dice because obviously there is no limit to how many burn tokens can be applied to the console, so the player can end up, or the opponent, sorry, can end up rolling multiple VDD dice in order to take my plane out of action. However, if Mr. Grunt over here has rolled a critical and then takes the VDD dice and rolls this symbol here, which is a standard hit, then that means the player must take a damage cube, which is also something that is missing from this version on Tabletop Simulator. So instead we're going to take one of these because that's probably the closest thing we can use. Yeah, so if the opponent rolls a standard hit with the VDD dice, then the player must take a damage cube and apply it to their console. Now you'll see that there are these hash squares around certain parts on the console, and basically if damage is dealt to the console, then that removes the ability to use that option during play. So you can see here, if I place this over the ability to turn right, then that removes my ability to turn right during play. And basically once all of these hash squares are filled up, if all of them are filled up, then your plane is destroyed and is removed from the battlefield entirely. However, if the opponent ends up rolling a critical with the VDD dice, as you can see here, that is the critical symbol, then that player, the opponent, will be able to decide where to place the damage token on the player's console. So if it's a standard bit of damage, then the player has the ability to place the damage cube where they want it to be. If it's a critical, then the opponent is allowed to place it where they want it to be on the opponent's console. And like I said, once all of those hash squares are filled up by damage tokens, then the biplane is destroyed and removed from the battlefield.
I've fallen!
Planes are also able to collide with each other should they end up on or intersecting the same hex. If this happens, both players must roll a single vehicle damage dice plus any additional VDD for each filled damage slot on their console. The player who receives the most damage from this roll will result in their vehicle being immediately destroyed. The surviving vehicle keeps their burn results and must apply them immediately. However, if the result of the roll is a tie, both planes are destroyed and immediately removed from the battlefield. Planes are also able to receive upgrades that can greatly enhance their strength when deployed. However, we'll be going into more detail about that once we reach the recruitment phase in 2 videos' time. Overall though, that is it for the aerial action phase of the miniatures game. I hope this video can and will help those players that want to understand how this phase works in a little bit more detail. In future, I do intend to start a single player campaign of this game once things have been updated here on TTS, not to mention getting the guys involved for some crazy multiplayer games as well. Anyway, next time we will of course be moving on to part 3 of this guide series, where we'll be breaking down the ground action phase. Hope you can join me for that, and as always, let me know your thoughts on this video in the comments, and in the meantime, I will catch you guys later for the next one.
Right, you putrid porker! You should be proud of your hogs. I've given you, 5 additional promotion points to decorate them with. Are you listening to a word I say? Repeat after me. Minefields are very bad things to wander into. Now, press your button and we will be the richest nation in the world. Just imagine, limitless swill supplies until the end of all time. Oh, God, don't mess it up.